No, I had a terrible headache and went to bed early, she said. You expect me to believe that? Asked Ray. Please, Ray, you have to believe me. I never meant to hurt you, she said. It's not just me you hurt, Carol, he said. This is our son, Timmy. Did you even think about him when Jake was seducing you? I did, she stammered. Ray interrupted her. I don't want to hear your pathetic excuses, he said. I'm going to file for divorce. And know this, I'm going to ask for custody. No, you can't do that. Please, can't we forget about this? There's nothing to forget, he said. You've been telling me nothing but nasty things about my job for months now. And now you're doing this. Well, I hope it was worth it. I'm going out for a couple hours. When I get back, I expect you'll be gone. He grabbed the suitcase that stood in front of the couch and walked away, leaving her sobbing. She came out of the alcove with tears in her eyes. No, 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 please, no, she said, crying. Actions have consequences, Carol, Adresha said. Please move to the next alcove. She grabbed the railing and stepped inside. This time she saw herself and Jake in the diner. So, did the nerd file for divorce? Asked Jake with a smirk. Yeah, he's filing, she replied. And he's demanding custody, alimony, and child support. Really? Asked Jake. Maintenance? What a loser. And my lawyer says he can get them since I make a lot more money than he does, said Carol. According to the paperwork, he can also prove that I'm not an attentive mother since Timmy had to stay with his parents while he was in Seattle. That sucks, Jake said. Look, why don't you move in with me? It'll be a lot better than living in a motel. And you'll be able to bring Timmy when you get dates. She looked at him, mulling over the options. Yeah, what the hell? I'll check out of the motel and come over. Most of my stuff is still in storage, so I'll need help moving it out. Okay, he said. He looked around for a few moments and then came close to her. Carol, look, I know you're going through a lot right now, but the truth is, I've fallen in love with you. And I know you have feelings for me, too. Maybe after the divorce you'll consider marrying me. That was quick, she said. The papers aren't even signed yet. You're right. I do have feelings for you, or I wouldn't have slept with you to begin with. Let me get through this divorce first, and then we'll get back to this issue, okay? Jake nodded his head. Okay, I understand. I've waited so long for you. I can wait a few more months. The scene ended, and Carol backed away from the alcove, her head spinning. Adresha pointed to the next portal, and Carol stepped inside, holding onto the railing. This time she saw herself at the front door of the house she had once shared with Ray and Timmy. Knocking on the door, she saw Ray's mother, Alice. What do you want, Carol? Alice asked coldly. Asked Alice coldly. Asked Alice coldly. I've come to pick up Timmy, replied Carol. Today is my visiting day. I'm sorry, Carol, but Timmy doesn't want to see you, said Alice. I'd like to hear it from him if you don't mind, Carol said. Have it your way, Alice said, stepping aside. Carol walked into the room and saw Timmy sitting on the couch looking straight ahead, oblivious to her presence. Timmy, I've come to pick you up, she said. Are you ready to go? I'm not going anywhere with you, he said angrily. Carol recoiled back, never before having heard her mild-mannered son speak like that. But Timmy, it's me, your mom. I've missed you so much and I really want to see you, she said. You don't understand, do you? Asked Timmy, his face flushed with anger. You hurt my daddy. I hate you and I never want to see you again. Timmy, please, Carol began. Timmy rose from the couch and looked up into her face. She had never seen such anger and hatred in his face before. No, I'm not going anywhere with you. Never. I hate you. You're not my mother anymore. Get out. With those words, he stormed up the stairs to his room. She heard his bedroom door slam and started up the stairs until Alice stopped her. I think you should leave the boy alone, Carol, she said. You've hurt him. He doesn't want to see you. You've turned him against me. You bitch. How dare you turn my son against me, Carol said. Alice folded her arms and looked at Carol like she was a child throwing a tantrum. I realize you're upset, so I'm going to ignore this outburst. Just this one time. But never again. Ray and I have done everything we can to make sure Timmy understands that you're still his mother. It's his decision, Alice said. I think you should leave, Carol. Carol looked at Alice, then slowly stood up and walked out of the house. When she got back to the car, she put her hands on the steering wheel and cried like a baby. What have I done? She said through her sobs. The script ended and Carol stepped back, tears falling freely down her face. How accurate are these scripts? She asked Adresja. Keep in mind, they are based on the assumption that the status quo has not changed. I believe they are a little over 99% accurate. I know it can be painful at times, but as I said, your actions have consequences, Adresja said. Please make your way to the next alcove. This script is somewhat disjointed, but I think it adequately captures the essence. It is essentially a summary of the next few years of your life. Carol stepped into the alcove and suddenly saw herself and Ray and their lawyers in the courtroom. The judge was preparing to rule on their divorce. Having carefully reviewed all information and evidence presented by both parties, I grant the plaintiff's petition for divorce. Plaintiff Raymond Beck will retain sole physical custody of minor child Timothy with visitation rights to the defendant. Plaintiff will also retain full use of the marital residence. Defendant will pay child support in the amount of 20% of her net monthly income. Defendant will also pay child support in the amount of $5,000 per month for not more than 5 years unless defendant remarries during that time. The defendant will also pay 1/2 of the mortgage on the family home for the same period of time. Both parties may retain their own retirement accounts, but all other marital assets are to be divided with the plaintiff receiving 60% of the assets. The defendant must surrender her wedding rings in accordance with the agreement, as well as revert to her maiden name. Court is adjourned, he said, tapping his gavel. A stunned Carol turned and walked away from her attorney. The scene changed and Carol saw herself in the small chapel in her wedding dress, standing next to Jake. They exchanged vows, kissed, and gleefully walked down the aisle to their new life. Before returning, they spent a 2-week honeymoon in Hawaii. When Carol walked into her office, she was greeted by Philip Carson. "Good morning, Mr. Carson," she said with a smile. "What can I do for you?" "Good morning, Mrs. B." "Sorry, Mrs. Callahan," he said. "Congratulations on your marriage. I hope you had a good honeymoon." "Yes, thank you," she replied. "Unfortunately, we have to let you go," he said. "What? Why?" she asked. "Corporate bylaws don't allow spouses to work on the same team," he said. "You and Jake are both on the executive team, so we have no choice but to let you go. However, in light of the fact that you have been with the company for 12 years, we will provide you with a very generous severance package. I want to thank you for your hard work and dedication and will be happy to provide you with a glowing recommendation if required." "Good," she said. "Thank you." At that moment, Jake appeared in her office. "What's going on here?" he asked. "Well, Jake, I'm just giving your fiancée some parting papers. You know the rules about spouses on the same team." "Yeah, but we need her," Jake said. "We'll find someone to take her place," Philip said. "However, we have another problem. Bill Fredericks told me that the company just received a lawsuit accusing us of not complying with employee morale regulations. I've also heard that some of our longtime customers aren't too happy with what they've heard. The board of directors will hold an emergency meeting tomorrow at noon to discuss the matter. In the meantime, Jake, you can consider yourself suspended until we make a decision. Have a good day," he added and walked out. Jake and Carol looked at each other in shock. The scene changed again, and Carol was standing in front of the door to the new house she and Jake had bought after he had been forced to sell the large house originally built by his father, the founder of Callahan and Son. The 5 years since that last day at Callahan and Son have been tumultuous. The board of directors fired Jake, quickly replacing him with a new CEO. Unable to find a job he was willing to take, Jake began drinking and was forced to sell the big house. Carol couldn't find a decent job either and took any job to keep the two of them afloat. Even with Philip's glowing recommendation, she quickly realized that many companies were reluctant to hire someone with her reputation. To cut costs, she sold her expensive car and replaced it with a 2-year-old Corolla. With the amount of alimony and child support she was ordered to pay, her fortune quickly dwindled to almost nothing, and her meager salary couldn't even cover her debts. She tried to convince Ray, but he was adamant. She must pay what the court ordered. If she didn't pay or apply for a modification of the judgment, he would press charges against her, he said. The court reluctantly reduced the payments, but she still struggled to make ends meet. Now that 5 years had passed, she no longer had to pay child support, but child support still had a significant impact on her budget. As for Timmy, she constantly tried to contact him, but he refused her calls, and cards and letters came back unopened. The postmark on the envelopes stung her chest. Returned to sender. Refused by addressee. All this because she needs some weird idiot, she thought, as she unlocked the door of their little old house. As soon as she entered the small ranch house, she heard sounds coming from their master bedroom. She walked into the room and saw Jake and a young woman. They stopped to look at her and then went back to their occupation. After spitting in the bathroom, she came back into the room and pounced on them both. "Get out of my house, you goddamn whore," she yelled at the woman, who was in her early 20s. The young woman, seeing the murderous expression on Carol's face, jumped out of bed and ran out of the house. "You bloody bastard. I destroyed my family and marriage to Ray to be with you, and this is how you repay me? Get out, you vile piece of shit. Get out of my house and never come back," she screamed. He held up his hands and tried to calm her down, but she wouldn't hear. "Shut up. Just shut up. You ruined my life, you asshole. You won't even lift a finger to do a single thing around here, or get a job. But you have time to hook some whore on. Don't say a word. Just get out. Out." By this time, she had already reached into his closet and threw his clothes on the floor. Furious, she went into the bathroom and threw his toiletries into the bedroom, while he nervously tried to gather them up. "Don't even pick up your shit. Just leave," she yelled. A couple hours later, he left, shoving his stuff into the back seat of his car. She sat on the couch and burst into tears, wishing she'd never met Jake. The scene changed again, and this time Carol saw something. She saw an announcement in the newspaper that Raymond Beck was marrying Catherine Hollingsworth. They looked so good in the picture published in the paper. She took a back seat and watched the couple exchange vows. She was shocked when she saw Timmy acting as Ray's best man. It had been 2 years since she had caught Jake in their marital bed with that young girl, and 7 years since she had last worked at Callahan and Son. In his 16 years, Timmy had been a very handsome young man, looking just like his father. Tears ran down her cheeks as she looked at the two men. After the preacher told Ray to kiss his bride, he had them turn to face the audience. "I am proud to introduce Mr. and Mrs. Raymond Beck," the preacher said. Everyone applauded and Timmy turned to Catherine. What he said to her tore at Carol's heart. "Welcome to the family, Mom," he said, and hugged her tightly. No one paid attention to the 42-year-old woman who ran out of the church, sobbing. She returned to her tiny one-bedroom apartment and sobbed, contemplating how to end her life. Carol backed away from the portal, shocked and appalled. She almost fell, but Adresha picked her up and kept her on her feet. "How much longer do I have to put up with this?" she asked. "There's only one more script and then we're done," Adresha replied. "It's a bit disturbing, so I'll join you." More disturbing than what I've already seen? Asked Carol. I'm afraid so, said Adreshja. They approached the next alcove, and Adreshja took Carol's hand before they stepped inside. For your information, the further into the future you go, the less accurate it is. However, assuming no other changes, the accuracy is at least 85%. How far back do we go? Asked Carol. This scenario is dated 20 years into the future, said Adreshja. You can predict events that far in advance? Asked Carol. As I said, assuming nothing changes in the status quo. Yes. But only with 85% accuracy, Adreshja told her. Let's go take a look. Carol tensed as they entered the alcove. The first thing she noticed was the cold air. The digital clock on a nearby building showed 2:15 a.m., the 25th of December. Christmas Day. She realized they were downtown, and the only person on the street was a homeless woman pushing a cart with few belongings. You brought me here to see a homeless woman downtown? Asked Carol. You know, Carol, looking at this scenario, I can't help but think of the words of Charles Dickens. Gloomy, dark, and piercingly cold, this is a night for the well-settled and well-fed to gather around a bright fire and thank God they are home, and for the homeless, starving wretch to lie down and die. At such moments in our bare streets, many a starved outcast closes his eyes, who, let their crimes be what they may have been, can hardly discover them in a more bitter world. What did you think when you saw the homeless man? Oh yes, why can't he get a job like your mother? Adreshja said with a slight note in her voice. Looking at that woman, seeing what you saw this night, do you still think that? Carol looked at the old woman and saw that she was making a plea to someone who wasn't here. She sat down on the cold concrete, holding out her hand. I don't know. What's wrong with her? Asked Carol. She's dying, said Adreshja. What is she dying from? Asked Carol. From several things. For starters, from undiagnosed cancer and malnutrition. She also suffers from mental illness. And on top of that, she's lonely and her heart is broken, said Adreshja. Where is her family? Is there nothing they can do? She has no family left, Adreshja said. She burned that bridge 20 years ago. Carol looked at her, shocked. Isn't there anything you can do? Asked Carol. I am doing something, Adreshja answered her. I'm trying to prevent it in the first place. The woman groaned and fell onto her side, then rolled over onto her back. We have to do something, Carol said as she walked over to the woman. Adreshja joined her. As Carol approached the woman, she looked at her face. It was wrinkled and dirty and her hair was gray and disheveled. But Carol recognized her. It was her. But she was no longer breathing and her lifeless eyes were wide open. In the old woman's hand was a locket on a chain. The locket was open and Carol looked at the faded photograph. It was an old photograph of her, Ray and Timmy in happier days. Ray had given her this locket when Timmy was only 5 years old. She dropped to her knees and began to tremble. No. Please, dear. Tell me it's not true. I'm begging you. Tell me it won't happen. Don't let it happen to me. Please, she begged, hot tears streaming down her face. Adreshja looked at her, but said nothing. Please. Let it stop. Don't make it anymore. I can't take it anymore. Carol sobbed, her body shaking with sobs. Adreshja lifted her to her feet, and they walked out of the alcove. Carol fell to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably. Is this what's going to happen to me? She asked. It's up to you, Carol. It's your choice. It's your life. Make it a good one. Make it meaningful. Adreshja poured a cup of tea on the table near the alcove and held it out to Carol. Here. Drink this. It will help you calm down. Carol sipped the hot liquid and felt better. Is all this really going to happen to me? Carol asked. Asked Carol. Asked Carol. If things continue as they are now, I guess so, said Adreshja. Only you can change the course of your life. Then I will, said Carol. I promise you, dear. I will be the best wife and mother a man could wish for. Adresha smiled. I sure hope so, for you and your family's sake, she said. Come, it's time for you to go back. Adresha helped her to her feet, and the next moment Carol was in her hotel room. Exhausted, she climbed back onto her bed, her mind still reeling with images of everything she had seen. Yes, she told herself, big changes were coming in her life. Soon she was sound asleep. When she woke up, she saw that it was only a few minutes before 8 in the morning. Sunlight poured into the room and she stood up, wiping the sleep from her eyes. Going to the bathroom, she made herself a cup of coffee, using the coffee pot kindly provided by the hotel. She thought about her next steps and remembered that she had seen something in the local paper a few days ago. She pulled out her phone and quickly found the information online. Once she found the ad in the paper, she saw that it was still active. So she opened the email app and sent a message to the address listed in the ad. With that done, she went to the bathroom, showered and dressed in the casual clothes she had brought the night before. Just as she finished brushing her hair, her phone beeped, letting her know she had an email. She looked and saw that it was a reply to the email she had sent earlier. She smiled as she read the message. She sent the reply and looked up, closing the app. Thank you, she said to no one in particular. She started to gather her things left over from the night before and heard a knock on the door. Looking through the peephole, she saw Jake. She took a deep breath, counted to 10 and opened the door. Good morning, Jake said with a smile. Mind if I come in? Good morning, Jake, she replied. Sure, come on in. I was just packing from last night. He entered the room and closed the door. You look much better this morning, he said. You gave us all a good scare last night. I feel much better. Thank you, she said. Do you want to go downstairs and get some breakfast? He asked. Actually, I'm just packing to go home, she said. I have a lot to get done before Ray gets back. Oh, Jake said, somewhat disappointed. After a few awkward minutes, he spoke again. Carol, can I talk to you for a minute? I need to get something out of my head. She stopped packing and looked at him. Sure, she said. What's on your mind? Well, Carol, the truth is that I do feel attracted to you, he said. I was wondering if we could get together and perhaps explore our feelings for each other. Have a seat, Jake, she said after a few moments of silence. Please. We need to talk. He sat down in a chair next to the desk in the room, wondering what she was going to say. He didn't like the tone of her voice. She wasn't angry, but she wasn't overly friendly either. She sat down on the bed, turning to face him. I have to admit that I felt attracted to you, too, she began. In fact, I came too close to acting on that attraction last night. I realized last night it would have been the biggest mistake of my life. But, Jake began, before she raised her hand to interrupt him. Please hear me out, Jake, she said. He closed his mouth and waited for her to continue. Yes, we worked together for a long time. And yes, I considered you a friend and mentor. But I'm married to the man I love with all my heart. To a man I promise to love, honor, cherish, and leave everything else behind until death do us part. And I fully intend to fulfill that promise. I also have a son who will be destroyed if our marriage breaks up. I cannot do that to him. I will not do that to him. So the better man wins after all, huh? He asked. We never had a rivalry, Jake, she said. And yes, he won my heart over 12 years ago. Besides, it didn't take you long to find someone to fill your bed, did it? How long have you and Brenda Spencer been dating? He looked at her shocked. How did you find out about her? He asked. I'd tell you, but you'd never believe me, she replied with a smile. Honestly, last night was the first time, he said. We both had a few drinks after you went to bed and things went on from there. I hope things work out for you too, Carol said. Just be careful. The company has rules about office romances. Yeah, tell me about it, he said with a chuckle. And since you're here, I suppose it's only fair that I give you a heads up, she said. I'll be submitting my resignation on the 3rd of January. What? You're leaving the company? After all these years on the job? I've decided it's time for me to prioritize, she said. And part of that means leaving Callahan and Son. I've enjoyed working with you and Philip and everyone else, but it's time for a change. Do you realize you are one of the highest paid CFOs in the region? You would be giving up a very lucrative career, he said. I realize there are things much more important than money or power, she said. What's gotten into you? He asked. She smiled, mulling over her answer. I'd tell you, but you'd never believe me, she said. Okay, if that's what it takes, he said. Good luck. I hope things work out for you. Can we at least part as friends? I guess so, she said. But no more than that, do you understand? I understand, he said. I don't like it, but I understand. Shall we have an old friendship hug? How about a warm handshake? She asked in response, extending her hand. He looked at her hand and nodded his head. Sure, a warm handshake, he said, standing up. They shook hands and Jake headed for the door. Oh, Jake. One last thing, Carol said, making him stop and turn around to her. What? He asked. Merry Christmas, she said. He looked at her, shocked. Merry Christmas to you too, friend, he said with a smile. She watched him leave the room and exhaled. She felt as if a huge weight had been lifted off her shoulders. After standing for a few minutes, she went back to gathering her things and headed downstairs to check out. She reached her car and put her things in the trunk. When she looked back toward the street, she saw a young couple with a baby beside their car in the parking lot with the hood up. The woman was crying, holding the baby in her arms, and the man was hugging her. She froze for a moment, contemplating what she should do. In a normal situation, she would have just ignored them and continued on her way without a second thought. Then she remembered what she had witnessed that morning and made a decision. Rubber is the way to go, she thought, as she gathered her purse and headed towards the couple. Excuse me, is everything okay? She asked. They both looked at her, and she saw tears and a look of sadness on their faces. No, ma'am, it's not okay, said the man. What happened? Asked Carol. Our car just broke down, said the man. We were on our way to Wichita Falls from San Antonio. My father is dying, and we wanted to get there before Christmas, so we could see him before he passed away. I spent the last of my money on gas, and the belt broke before we could get on the highway. I was supposed to start working at a store to help the family, but now we can't get there. Carol considered the situation and pulled out her cell phone. Hold on, let's see what we can do, she told them. She looked through her contacts and found what she was looking for. She hit speed dial and waited for an answer. Mike's Towing and Auto Repair. Mike speaking, the man on the other end of the line said. Mike, this is Carol Beck, she said. Good morning, Mrs. Beck. How can we help you today? He asked. Listen, Mike, I'm with a couple that's traveling to Wichita Falls and their car broke down. The man says the belt broke. Could you get someone to fix it? She asked. What kind of car is it? He asked. Hold on, she said. She looked at the man in front of her. What kind of car is this? It's a 1986 Celebrity 2.8-liter V6, the man said. Carol repeated this information to Mike. Wait a minute, Mike said. Yes, I have a snake belt for this car. Where is the car located? She told him where the car was located. Okay, Mike said. I can send someone over in 45 minutes to an hour. Would that be okay with you? That would be perfect, Mike. Thank you. And put it on my tab, okay? Are you sure, Mrs. Beck? Our guys are also doing a quick check and topping up fluids. Coolant may be needed, Mike said. Whatever it takes to get them to Wichita Falls safely, Mike, she said. She and Ray had used Mike's services as their mechanic for years. He was excellent at his job and she trusted him. Yes, ma'am, we'll take care of them for you, he replied enthusiastically. She finished speaking and looked at the family. They looked like they hadn't had a proper meal in a long time. The mechanic will be here in about an hour, she said. Don't worry about a thing. I've already made all the arrangements. It's getting a little chilly in here. Let's go inside and I'll make you some breakfast while you wait, okay? Are you sure? The man said. We can wait here. Nonsense, she said. Come on, it's warm inside. She turned toward the hotel, and they followed her inside. When they entered, she led them to a table by the window. When they were seated, a waiter approached them. Are you guests here? The waiter asked. The dining room is for guests only. I was a guest here last night, Carol said. At the Callahan and Son party. You're not going to deny the family breakfast on Christmas Eve, are you? The waiter looked confused for a moment. I guess not, he said. We're running a breakfast special right now. Denver omelet, hash browns, toast, bacon, juice, and coffee. Will that work? Yes, Carol said. 2 servings and some oatmeal or cereal for the baby, please. She pulled out her credit card and held it out to the waiter. On me, she said. When the waiter left, she pulled out 2 $50 bills and held them out to the man. You'll have no trouble getting to Wichita Falls with this money. Ma'am, I can't repay you for this, the man said as he took the money. Don't worry about that, Carol said. Take care of this beautiful family and maybe someday you'll be able to repay them in kind. The young woman looked at Carol with tears in her eyes. Thank you so much, she said. We've had a very difficult year. God bless you. Carol felt tears come to her eyes as she remembered what she had seen when she was with Justice. He's already done it, Carol told the woman. Merry Christmas, the woman said. The man seconded her words. Merry Christmas to you, too, Carol said. She left and walked to her car, fighting the tears in her eyes. When she got in the car, she looked up and saw Justice, Dr. A, and Cameron looking at her with smiles on their faces. Cam gave her a thumbs up. She smiled back at them and nodded her head. She put the key in the ignition and looked up, but they were gone. She looked around but saw no sign of them anywhere. Strange, she thought. She got out of the car and headed toward the house. When she got to the street where she lived, she felt like a completely different person. She saw Alice's car parked outside the house and realized that her in-laws had probably brought Timmy home. She pulled into the garage and went inside. Mommy, exclaimed Timmy as she entered the house. The boy put his arms around her and kissed her on the cheek. She hugged him tightly and looked up to see Alice and George. Thank you for looking after him, she said. My pleasure, Alice replied. Are you all right? You look a little different. Actually, I feel better than I have in a long time, Carol said. She looked around the house, noticing the lack of decorations. There wasn't even a Christmas tree in the front room. Something about it didn't feel right. She looked at Timmy again. Honey, do you know where your daddy keeps the Christmas decorations? She asked. George and Alice looked at each other in surprise, and Timmy looked at his mother in shock. It had been a long time since they had used ornaments. Yes, I use, he said. Don't you want to hang them up? Asked Carol. Timmy's face lit up and he smiled. Yes, I'd like to, he said. Dad, could you help Timmy with that? And maybe with the outside lights? Asked Carol. Yes, I'd love to, he said. Timmy, do you know which Christmas CD your dad likes best? Asked Carol. Yes, I do, he said and walked over to the music cabinet. He looked through the CDs and pulled out one of the Mannheim Steamroller CDs that Ray had bought years ago. He held it out to Carol. He really likes this one. Will you let us listen to it? Sure, honey. It's Christmas, isn't it? Yay! Shouted Timmy. George and Alice looked at them and at each other, more surprised than ever, as Carol inserted the disc into the record player. She pressed play, and soon music filled the room. Carol smiled widely as the music played. Are you sure you're all right, dear? Asked Alice. Oh, yes, Mom, I'm sure, replied Carol. Now, Timmy, go with Grandpa and do whatever he says, okay? I will, Mommy, he said, grabbing George's hand. Carol heard her phone buzz and looked up to see that Ray had sent her a text message. Got a seat a little early. Leaving Seattle in half an hour. I'll see you soon. Love you. That's great. Love you, too, she wrote back. Ray left Seattle on an early flight, she told Alice. Could you help me make cookies and hot chocolate? I'm afraid my culinary skills have been failing me lately, and I could use some help. Yes. What's going on, Carol? I've never seen you so happy and ebullient. I'll tell you later, she said. This is incredible. Okay. I need to hear it, Alice said as they went into the kitchen. Ray was glad he'd been able to leave Seattle early. As it turned out, there was a thunderstorm brewing over Denver and they missed it by about a half hour. He flew into DFW, loaded up the car, and headed home. As he pulled onto his street, he was surprised to see Christmas lights on his house. He saw his dad and Timmy standing outside with a few neighbors and wondered what was going on. He pulled into his garage and came out to see what all the commotion was about. He was also surprised to hear Christmas music coming from his front room. "Daddy!" shouted Timmy, running out to meet his father. Ray picked the boy up in his arms and held him tightly as he walked toward the front yard. He stared in shock at the lights and decorations of his house. "Daddy," he said. "What's going on?" "Carol's going to have a seizure when she sees all this." George looked at his son and laughed. "Whose idea do you think this was, son?" asked George. Ray looked at him, not knowing what to answer. Carol opened the front door and ran out to meet her husband. "Honey, I'm so glad it worked out for you," said Carol. "I missed you so much." "I missed you too," he replied. "What does all this mean?" "And the music. I thought you hated Christmas." "Okay, who are you really, and what did you do to my wife?" "That was the old me," Carol said. "The old Ice Queen Scrooge is gone." I hope you enjoyed it. So subscribe to my channel and watch the next video. Wow, what an emotional roller coaster. If you found this story as shocking and captivating as I did, make sure to hit that like button and share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you never miss another gripping tale. Stay tuned for more stories that will keep you coming back for more. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today, I have a jaw-dropping story to share with you. Well, here goes. This is sort of embarrassing, but I just found out that my wife of just 3 years, I am 31, and my wife is 29, had a threesome 1 week before we were married. The most horrible thing is, from the looks of it, she was never going to tell me, and I would have gone on living my life thinking she was this amazing person who did everything right. When in reality, she was just as flawed as so many of us are. We don't have any kids or any outstanding debt together. So, there wouldn't be any messy legalities to deal with. I don't know how to begin to rebuild trust with her, or if I even want to try. I didn't notice anything out of the ordinary, but like I said, I wasn't looking for anything, but I started to notice a few weeks ago. She would always hang out with a friend of hers and her husband, a lot, even canceled a few of our plans to go hang out with him or do something with just the 3 of them. I confronted her about it, and she said that they were just friends with a long history and that I was being paranoid. I didn't want to believe her, but I had no reason not to. So, I didn't really press. I trusted what she said and didn't bring it up anymore. A few weeks go by and I get a call from my wife's sister asking me what time would I be home after work. I was like, why? She said that she needed to talk to me about something, but couldn't do it over the phone. I told her I would be home in a few hours, and she said she would come over then. When I got home, my wife's sister was at the front door. As soon as I walked up, she told me that her and her husband had been talking and they thought that I should know that right before I married her sister. Her sister had a threesome with the couple she hangs out with a lot. I said, "What, you're joking?" She says, "No, I'm not joking." She said that my wife told her and swore her to secrecy. I hesitated for a second and said, "Swore you to secrecy? Why are you telling me now?" She said, "Because she thought you should know. And that if it were her, she would want to know." I went into shock. I couldn't believe it. She even described the events of that night in detail to me. She said that her and her husband had been debating for months on whether or not to tell me, but they decided that I deserved to know. They didn't want me to find out some other way and think they were keeping something from me. I thanked her for telling me and we hugged. She left. I go inside and sit on the couch in shock and in disbelief. I gather myself and I call a friend of mine about what I was just told, and he recommended right away that I confront her about it. My friend said, I will be careful about what you say and how you say it. You don't want to make things worse than they already are. I thought about what my friend said and decided that I was going to wait until the next day to talk to her about it. The next day at work, I couldn't focus on anything. All I could think about was what I had been told and what it meant. I came home from work and my wife was in the kitchen, cooking dinner. As soon as she saw me, she knew something was wrong. She asked me what was wrong and I said nothing. She asked me again. And this time I said, we need to talk. She turned off the stove and we sat down at the kitchen table. I looked her in the eye and said, I was told that right before we got married, you had a threesome with the couple you hang out with. Her face went pale white. She couldn't say anything. I asked her if it was true. She finally found her voice and said, yes, it's true. I asked her why she did it. She said, I don't know. I was drunk and it just happened. I asked her why she didn't tell me. She said, because I knew you would be hurt and disappointed in me. And I didn't want to lose you. I asked her if she loved me. She said, yes, of course I do. I asked her if there was anything else I should know. She said, no, that's it. I told her I needed some time to process what she had told me and left the room. A few days went by, and we didn't really talk about what happened. We just tried to act like everything was normal, but things were not normal. I couldn't get the image out of my head of her with another man, let alone another couple. I started to doubt everything she ever told me. I started to question our whole relationship. I mean, she cheated. We were engaged to be married and she cheated. Plain and simple. A few days after that, I came home. She was sitting on the couch and I just flat out told her I wanted a divorce. She begged and pleaded with me, saying she was sorry and that she would do anything to make it up to me. I said, no, I'm done. I can't trust you anymore. I told her she betrayed me and kept it a secret and I wouldn't be able to look at her the same. She started crying and I just walked away. When I walked away from her, she pleaded one last time to give her another chance. I just simply said, I can't, and left. I went to a hotel and stayed there for a few days, just to clear my head. I came home and she was gone. She had moved out. I don't know where she went. The next day, I called a few divorce attorneys in the area to see what my options are and start the process. The attorney I settled on said that since we don't have any kids and no assets together, this should be a pretty easy divorce. Fast forward a few days, my soon-to-be ex-wife's sister calls me and says she needs to talk to me about something. She comes over and we sit down and she tells me that her sister is pregnant with my child. I was in complete shock. I didn't know what to say or do. I asked her when she found out. She said a few days ago. I asked her sister, why didn't my soon-to-be ex-wife tell me? She said, because you two were not talking and you would probably use it against her in the divorce. I said, wait, I want to make sure this baby is mine. Then her sister interrupts me and says, it may not be yours. Then I said, let me guess, because of the couple she has been cheating with. She said, yes, it's possible. She then said, what are you going to do about it? I told her, I didn't know. I needed some time to think about it. Even if the baby is mine, I am still going through with the divorce. I just can't be with someone I can't trust. A few weeks go by and my soon-to-be ex-wife's sister calls me back and says that her sister wants to talk to me. She comes over and we sit down at the kitchen table and she says, I'm sorry for what I did. I was drunk and it just happened. I said, yes, you were drunk, but that's not an excuse. I then told her we don't need to talk about that anymore. I have made my decision. She then said, I know you're going through with the divorce, but I want you to know that I'm keeping the baby regardless if it's yours or not. She then said, I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive me someday. I told her I forgave her a long time ago. I just can't be with someone I can't trust. After we had that discussion, she leaves. A few weeks go by and my attorney says that he has finally gotten around to filing the divorce petition. I am new to these forums, but I have a lot to think about if this kid is mine and the upcoming divorce. I appreciate the support I got. I have to make sure I make the right decisions. I know I am with the divorce. I can't be weak and take her back because she has a baby on the way that might not be mine. I will come back and give an update on my situation. I don't know when that will be. Hello, everyone. I wanted to give an update on my situation since finding out that my wife of 3 years had a threesome 1 week before our wedding. Since then, she has moved out. I found out that she has been living with her sister and is hanging out with her friend and her husband. And supposedly she is pregnant with my child, possibly twins. My soon-to-be ex-wife has tried to get back together with me. It seems like almost every week, and I keep telling her there is no chance of that happening. It seems she doesn't get it, or maybe she is just hoping that I would change my mind. Anyway, fast forward a few weeks, and my attorney informs me that the divorce hearing is scheduled almost a month away. I go to the divorce hearing and find out that my soon-to-be ex-wife is also asking for spousal support, even though she is the one who cheated and is currently living with her sister rent-free. The judge decides to decline a request for spousal support, saying that she has no basis for spousal support and you have only been married for 3 years. The judge asked both attorneys if there was anything else and both say no. And the judge grants me the divorce. I didn't lose anything. A few weeks after the divorce, I found out that my ex-wife's sister kicked her out of her house and she is now living with the couple that she had a threesome with. I also found out that she is not pregnant and was never pregnant. I was shocked that she would fake a pregnancy to try and get money from me, but I guess she would do anything to get what she wants. And to my surprise, she still calls and sends text messages. I don't respond to either of them. Anyway, I want to thank everyone for reading this and supporting me. I am still heartbroken over this, but divorcing her was the best thing I could have done. Stick around to see how this shocking tale unfolds, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more intense stories. Hey everyone, welcome back. Today, I've got an absolutely jaw-dropping story for you. It was an especially cold December morning when Stuart got into his car's icy cabin. After starting the engine, he warmed it up a little and drove cautiously onto the nearly empty road. Stuart was on his way to a neighboring town to make a deal with a new supplier of auto parts for his store. Recently, he had been unlucky with suppliers, so he hoped that this time the negotiations would go well. Thankfully, Stuart was right this time. He was able to agree on shipments that were supposed to start from the new year. After shaking hands with his new partner, he went outside. Delighted with the successful deal, Stuart decided to stop by a store and buy a gift for his wife, Emily. He pulled up near a shopping center, walked among the many stores, and chose a beautiful watch for Emily with a gold-plated case from an expensive boutique. By the time Stuart left the city, it was already dark and heavy snow had started to fall. Visibility on the road was rapidly deteriorating, and even with the headlights on and the windshield wipers working, it was almost impossible to see anything in the distance. When Stuart drove onto an intersection, he only had time to notice something dark on the left with his peripheral vision. He started to brake, but it was already too late. A heavy logging truck that had jumped onto the highway easily knocked Stuart's car off the road, crushing the driver's side with its huge bumper. Hey, how are you there? Are you alive? Stuart struggled to open his eyes and saw through the broken glass the face of an unfamiliar man. The man immediately got busy, tried to open the door, but it didn't budge. Then he ran for a pry bar and with difficulty, but broke the battered door and picking Stuart up by the arms, dragged him outside. Stuart gathered his strength, turned his head, looked at his feet, and was horrified that his feet were completely crushed and left bloody tracks in the snow. His last strength left him, and Stuart lost consciousness. He woke up in the hospital. The first thing he did was try to move his toes, and realizing they were gone, moaned in pain and despair. A gray-haired doctor came into the ward, carefully examined his bandaged limbs, and seeing the patient suffering on his face, said, "Well, calm down, please. It's not as bad as it could have been. You lost a lot of blood, and it's just a miracle that you survived." Emily arrived in the evening, tears in her eyes, as she sat down next to him and took his hand in hers. Stuart looked at her and remembered buying her a watch at the store and groaned at his own foolishness. I stopped by the store to buy you a watch. Why couldn't I have just stayed home? He muttered. Stuart, everything will be good, don't worry. His wife tried to reassure him, holding his hand tighter. What's so good about this? Who needs me now? Stuart said irritably. Tell Graham to manage the store himself from now on, he added, turning to the wall. After being discharged, Emily suggested that Stuart live in his late grandfather's old house, outside the city, surrounded by nature. Stuart agreed, seeing it as a good idea. Emily packed her husband's things in a suitcase and one more time offered to hire a caregiver for Stuart, but he angrily refused. He got out of bed to show her that he could take care of himself, but a sharp pain in his lower back forced him back onto the bed. Gritting his teeth to keep from screaming in pain, he made another attempt and moved to his wheelchair, showing his wife that he didn't need anyone's help. With a proud look, he left the room. Everything in his grandfather's house was as simple as ever, but beautiful in its own way. Stuart gazed at his grandfather's portrait and suddenly remembered what he was like when he was alive. Although it had been 5 years since his passing, Stuart still vividly remembered his grandpa. He remembered his face, overgrown with stiff bristles, and his old crumpled work shirt, stained with gasoline and tobacco. He wore it all the time, taking it off only for washing. Grandfather died 5 years ago, but Stuart still missed him. These memories took him back to the distant past. He remembered the times when his mother was still alive, before she was diagnosed with cancer. Every morning she used to make him pancakes and carrot fritters, which he loved. It all felt so close now that Stuart completely withdrew into himself and sat in his wheelchair, hypnotized. Stuart, are you even listening to me? Emily called out to him. I might be leaving soon. Don't miss me too much. I'll be back. And call me if you need anything. Okay, Stuart nodded. Don't forget about me while you're gone. He joked, but his wife flinched at his words. How can you say that? Emily said, offended. Then she kissed her husband goodbye and left quietly. Stuart watched as the heavy door closed behind his wife, and at that moment it seemed to him that he had lost her for the last time. He instinctively jerked forward, but a sharp pain pierced his back, and he, groaning, wearily sank into his wheelchair. A month passed. At first, Emily called Stuart almost every day, inquiring about his health, offering help, but then her calls became less frequent and finally stopped altogether. Stuart, in a troubled foreboding, tried to reach Emily himself, but her phone did not answer. Stuart guessed that Emily had left him and decided to live her own life, so he soon gave up his attempts to contact her. Deep down, he understood his wife, because not everyone can find the strength to take on such a heavy burden as him, but resentment firmly settled in his heart and did not give him peace, neither day nor night. One evening, lost in troubled thoughts, Stuart suddenly heard the gate creak outside. He looked out the window, but it was already quite dark outside, and he didn't see anyone. Thinking that he had imagined it, he was about to immerse himself in his thoughts again, but then he clearly heard a knock on the door. It's open, come in, Stuart called out, wondering who could come to visit him at this time. The door opened and, to his surprise, Stuart saw his neighbor, Penelope, standing on the threshold. She was petite, slender, and modestly dressed. He looked her up and down and gestured for her to sit at the table. The girl walked timidly into the room and sat down opposite. Hi, Stuart, she said. I was passing by and saw the lights in the window, so I decided to stop by. How long have you been here? It's been a month. I just haven't left the house, Stuart said gloomily as he rolled out from behind the table, demonstrating his wheelchair. What happened to you? Penelope exclaimed concernedly. Stuart wearily waved his hand and told Penelope the story. He had barely finished when they heard a noise from outside, and then someone, drunk, started calling out for Penelope rudely. Is that your stepfather? Stuart asked. The girl sadly nodded and explained that her stepfather had been drinking heavily for a long time, almost lost his mind, and life with him at home had become unbearable for her. Penelope could have gone to the city to study, but without money it was impossible, and there was nowhere to earn money in the village. Shivering from the cold, Penelope approached the stove to warm her hands and turned to Stuart. Can I stay with you tonight? I'm scared to go back home. He'll definitely beat me. Stuart nodded and suggested that Penelope choose any place she felt comfortable. While wincing in pain, he approached the stove and removed a pot of potatoes from the burner. Seeing Stuart's anguish, Penelope took the pot from him and helped set the table. You need to see Mr. Khazard, she advised. People come from all over the region to see him. He'll fix your back right away, that sorcerer. Stuart laughed, recalling old Mr. Khazard living in the forest. He's a healer, Penelope corrected him sternly. Last summer I dislocated my leg and he fixed it so well that there wasn't even a trace left. Stuart waved his hand, promising to visit Mr. Khazard somehow, and suggested Penelope distract herself from the conversation and finally have dinner. A month passed. Penelope visited Stuart every day, helped with the household chores, chatted with him over a cup of tea, and once brought Mr. Khazard to his place. He immediately examined Stuart, running his fingers over his spine and pressing on one of the vertebrae so hard that Stuart almost passed out. Mr. Khazard told him to endure a little and repeated his manipulations several more times. Done, he said, patting Stuart gently on the back. It won't hurt you anymore. Stuart smiled incredulously, but within a few hours he realized that he really felt better. Within a couple of days, he could easily turn his torso, bend and straighten his back, and even while sitting in his wheelchair, he could do housework. He went out to the garden for the first time and put the plot in order, and didn't even feel tired. Returning to the house, he realized for the first time in months that there were pleasant moments in life. But before he could enjoy this new feeling, he was startled by the unexpected sound of the phone ringing. It was Martha, Emily's sister. She struggled to find the right words for a while, but eventually she gathered the courage to tell Stuart that Emily had decided to file for divorce. Stuart was stunned and didn't know what to say. It seemed to him that the remnants of his world had collapsed into an abyss, taking his hope with it. Why, he managed to say after a long silence. They're planning to get married, Martha said, embarrassed. Stuart felt like he couldn't breathe. He asked Martha to cool back, and after turning off his phone, threw it into the corner of the room. Slowly, he walked to his grandfather's old chest of drawers, opened the top drawer, and took out an antique straight razor with a beautiful bone handle. Stuart ran his finger along the blade to make sure it was still as sharp as it was years ago, and started to think. He imagined himself making just one thin cut and finally getting rid of the pain in his heart. Bitter thoughts, loneliness at night, and endless suffering. Someone knocked on the gate, and fast footsteps approached. Penelope appeared on the threshold with a large bundle in her hands. Are you out of your mind, Stuart? She shouted. Don't even think about it, she cried, rushing towards him and snatching the razor from his hand. Why? Why did you want to do that? Everything was so good. Are you kidding at me? You all say that, but in reality you pity me. What good is it to be without feet and not be able to live my life to the fullest? He shouted and hit his stumps with all his might. Penelope froze in horror and helplessness, not knowing how to react. Then she suddenly came to her senses and unfolded the bundle she had brought with her. 2 prostheses and crutches fell out onto the floor. This is what Aunt Helen asked you to deliver, stuttered Penelope, and kneeling down, she attached the prostheses to Stuart's legs. These are left from her late husband. Penelope helped Stuart to stand up, handed him the crutches, and he, unsteadily, moving on his artificial legs, took a few steps. Well done. See how great it is. Penelope rejoiced, tenderly observing every movement of Stuart. Stuart walked around the room, took a breather, and approached the girl. Thank you. It's really not bad at all. He smiled and held Penelope close to him. The girl immediately hugged Stuart by the neck and kissed him. Regaining her senses, she recoiled in fear, but Stuart managed to grab her by the waist, pulled her close, and running his hand through her lush hair, brought the girl's face so close that their lips met again in a hot kiss. That night they spent together, for the first time as a couple. A week later, Stuart went to the city to divorce his wife and check on the business of the store. The divorce procedure went quickly, and Stuart, dryly saying goodbye to his ex-wife, quickly left the registry office. Emily tried to stop Stuart to ask for forgiveness, but he did not even look at her and walked past, tightly squeezing the crutches. Stuart called a taxi and went to the store. Entering inside, he looked around confusedly. The store was empty. There were some crumpled boxes and old, unsold parts lying on the dusty showcases. Stuart approached Graham, bent over the cash register, and hit the floor with a crutch with force. Graham looked up and recoiled in horror. Stuart, if you're about Emily, then she. He started speaking nervously. I'm not interested in those details. Stuart interrupted him. I came about the store. I see things are not going well. Graham collected all the bills and small coins in the cash register, put them in a bag, and handed them to Stuart. We need to sell the store, he said. There are no buyers, no profits, only expenses. It's not up to you to decide. This is my store, and I will decide what to do with it. And believe me, I can handle this problem. Stuart sharply replied and left the store without saying goodbye. Stuart was sorry for his business. He had put great effort into this store, but there was nowhere to take the money for investing in it. The only solution could be a loan from the bank, but he doubted that he would be approved. At home he shared his doubts with Penelope, and the girl suddenly, as if remembering something, looked at him with wide-open eyes, and then, asking him to wait a little, ran out onto the street towards her house. She returned in a few minutes, and handed Stuart a large black key, clearly of antique workmanship, decorated with intricate carving. Your grandfather asked me shortly before his death to keep this key and give it to you. I often came to see him, and he always talked about you. He also asked to pass on this key is from the chest that is hidden in the basement. I don't even know what could be there. Well, okay, we'll see tomorrow, Stuart smiled. On the next morning, Stuart took out a flashlight, handed it to Penelope, and ordered her to follow him. In the kitchen, he lifted the heavy lid of the pantry, carefully descended, and as soon as he reached the ground, he shouted to Penelope to also come down. When they turned on the flashlight, the darkness dissipated, and in the corner, they saw traces of brickwork. After dismantling the bricks, they pulled out a small iron chest. The key turned with a creak in the hole, a click sounded, and Penelope gingerly lifted the lid off the chest. Inside was a small bag on a string. Stuart took it, untied it, and poured the contents into his palm. Penelope brought the flashlight closer and froze in amazement. On Stuart's palm, the sharp edges of real precious stones glistened and sparkled with different colors. Penelope and Stuart stood, admiring the incredible and mesmerizing sight, unable to look away, and everything that was happening seemed like a fairy tale dream to them. Having come to his senses, Stuart chose the biggest ruby from the pile of stones and gave it to Penelope. The girl accepted the gift and began to admire it. You know, I remembered. My grandfather once told me about his youth. He worked in the mines, but I never thought that he hid his findings and kept them for so many years. Stuart took a final look at the exquisite treasure, neatly folded the stones back into the bag, and smiled contentedly. He felt confident again and hoped that everything would be fine for them now, as he could use the inheritance to get the store out of debt, improve the business, and buy himself the most modern prosthesis. Will you marry me? He suddenly asked Penelope. We will sell the stones, leave here, and start a new, happy life. Do you agree? Of course, my love. If you only knew how long I've been waiting for this, she whispered, and hugging Stuart around the neck, buried her face in his chest. Stuart hugged the girl tightly and realized that all the pain and heaviness of the past few months after the accident was finally leaving. Love helped him forget about despair, betrayal, and disappointment, filling his soul with the long-forgotten feeling of incredible, all-consuming happiness. Hello. I have always held moral high ground when dealing with personal trivial matters. I've had a couple failed relationships that taught me to not trust most females, but I still believe in love, hoping it finds me with a good lady. I am also a commissioned officer of the United States Army, a honor I hold in high prestige, and always answer the call when duty calls. My personal marital situation with my wife, however, has become a pain in my heart. Things went bad between us, and this time, I went full savage mode as I refused to be a gentleman anymore to these females. I carried out a petty retribution revenge, which I'm not proud of, but this is my story. I am 39 years old. I met my wife 3 years ago when she had just moved out of her small hometown and moved to Texas. I had just gotten out of the military after 7 years of duty and 2 tours under my belt. To be honest, becoming a normal civilian was not easy after my combat experiences, but I will save the details on that and focus on my marriage ordeal. My wife was much younger at the age of 25, but we met at a local bar one night. I was drinking away my tour horrors. She was by herself also, and I managed to walk up to her to strike up a conversation. She seems cool and we hit it off well. She was making me feel normal again, and I was loving her presence and being around her increasingly every day. So, after a few months we had been together, I found out that my wife used to have a bad drug use issue in the past. She told me being around me had helped her kick the bad habit, and I was proud that she overcame her demon as she was helping me overcome mine as well. It seemed we both helped each other fill a void in our lives as we complemented each other, and this further intensified our romance. Our relationship began to grow even more as I proposed to her, and she agreed. Shortly after we got married, my wife told me she had always wanted to join the military and went ahead with enlistment into the Navy shortly after our marriage. I was not the biggest fan of the idea of my now wife joining the military. I thought my military experience was in the past. I explained how being in the military can be psychologically draining if she wasn't mentally prepared as I was. Even though I found the duty fulfilling and it's my pride to call myself a vet, it still took me to some dark places mentally as my therapist was still helping me recover. I just wanted to make sure it wasn't my influence and swayed her into joining the service. I decided not to persuade her against it but supported her decision, playing my role as a good husband. Before she joined the military, however, things had become rocky in our marriage. I tried to think in my head and pinpoint exactly where things went wrong, but I simply could not place it. I have been a good provider, her defender, and pampered her with love and abundance. She just started to seem more irritated at me for little to no reason. It was boggling. Where was the love we started and built our marriage on? I just hoped I hadn't rushed into a lifetime commitment without fully knowing my wife. She was my light at the end of tunnel, but the light is now flickering and dimming out. When I tried to talk to her, she would tell me things are fine but admitted our love seems to be fading. I don't want my wife falling out of love with me, so I cranked up the time activities we spent together. I would make sure every Friday night was dinner date and watch a movie afterwards. I started running with her every Saturday morning as she was raising her fitness and endurance to join the Navy. I would even go grocery shopping with her, and every chance I get I spend with her. At some point she started to say I was overbearing and pushing myself onto her wasn't helping. I was making these efforts, but it was futile. I tried to reconnect with her through the things we enjoyed doing together before we got married, but she won't even sleep on the same bed with me anymore after our first year of marriage. She would say the bed was too soft and we needed a firm mattress for her back issues. The same back issues she had no problem sleeping on the couch with or in the other room. We're a new couple. I told her I wanted to sleep in the other room with her, but she would produce flimsy excuses, like it was too small to accommodate us both. I suggested we buy a Tempur-Pedic, but it was apparent she just wasn't interested, so I would let things go. She would occasionally come to sleep on our bed. Things was weird out of nowhere, or maybe, if I were to take some accountability, I was blinded to my wife losing love interest in me till it was too late. I simply thought everything was all right between us and couldn't read the signs early enough. After her first deployment, what was getting worse became much worse. I couldn't lean in to kiss my wife any longer or show public display of affection because she would cringe and tell me no. Lovemaking was non-existent at this point. She would tell me I reminded her of the time she had a bad forceful encounter and was taken advantage of. No husband likes to hear these types of comments from his wife, and being described to in a word violator was heart-sinking. I didn't deserve this, and it was not fair. I told her if I had offended her, she should tell me so I could apologize, but she wouldn't open to me. I wasn't diagnosed, but I'm sure I went into depression over my wife's mental abuse treatment and felt even lonelier than I was before I met her. My mental stress level was off the chart, but I tried to hang in there hoping my wife would come around. She went for her second deployment, and when she came home this time, she told me she wanted to divorce. My heart sank further. After I heard this, honestly, it felt like someone had taken a sledgehammer and landed multiple blows to my heart. It felt like it was about to explode. I told her I thought we were working on issues. I told her I didn't even know we had issues or what her issues was in the first place, and that's when she laid it on me that she was having an affair. This was the nail in the coffin for me. I asked her how long this has been going on, and she truthfully confessed it has been about 6 months into our marriage at this point. I was now getting furious at myself because I should have known. I wept like a baby that day, even though I was raging, and all what I kept asking was why? 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 I had gone years thinking I did something wrong and tried everything to make things right. She could have spared me the emotional heartache. What was the point of telling me she cheated on me anyway? I wanted to know details about who her secret lover was, and she told me it was a Navy guy she had been seeing around the same time she got engaged to me. Apparently, she developed a thing for men in uniform after she met me and wanted to know more about that lifestyle, the battle stories, and overall experiences. When I wasn't too forthcoming with my stories because of my battle scars, she found someone who was willing to share such stories with her, and they fell in love along the way. At least that was what I interpreted the nonsense she was spewing to me as an explanation. Her secret lover even encouraged her to join the service. When she explained the chronological timeline of the whole thing, it was so baffling to me that I just accepted my fate, that I've been a fool in love the whole time. Even worse than a simp, because here I was drowning myself with drinks every night and driving myself into a dark place mentally the whole time. It had nothing to do with me but a sick wife's uniform fetish. Or, what do I make of this predicament? She told me she was sorry and that I could start seeing someone else. All I got in her remorse was sorry. The last couple years of my life with her came down to one word: sorry. She went low, and I was ready to snap out of feeling sorry for myself and play in the mud. I started to plot how to get back at her in a petty outrage. First, I told her before I signed the divorce papers, we must see a marriage counselor. Whatever plan, she has to go. Running to her side lover has to wait, because I wasn't ready to sign. This was out of pure spite because she desperately wanted me to sign, as if her lover had given her an ultimatum to break up with me. I became equally disengaged and even started to bring women home into our marital bed as she's half asleep on the silly couch. I told the ladies I bring home that I had a roommate staying with me and not to worry when they see her when we entered the house. I would tell the girls that my wife was the roommate I was telling them about. They would even say hi and addressed her as roommate, and we would just go into my matrimonial bed with the door shut. I dared her to bring her lover into the house I was paying the mortgage on and see what happens. I stopped caring about her, and to my surprise, when I stopped giving her attention, she started to try to initiate engagements and conversations with me. I simply ignored her and respectively made life unbearable for her. She told me we should separate before we finalized the divorce, and I would simply tell her she should feel free to get the heck out of my house. I refused to move to a hotel. I don't know why, but she wouldn't move out either. She booked the counseling sessions and told me we can go for therapy like I wanted, and I would always give her reasons why I couldn't make it. Sometimes I would even tell her I was on my way and wouldn't show after she had paid for the session. My irresponsible actions were now starting to get to her, and she started heavy drinking and eventually went back to her past days of drug use. I took my pettiness to the extreme when I called her command and police to report her for using. I had been working with Naval Criminal Investigative Services, NCIS, to build a case against her. Recorded her videos and collected evidence when she was unsuspecting as I mounted cameras in the house. I didn't care if the videos were admissible or not, but I provided them anyway. She got kicked out of the Navy shortly after getting her promotion and was about to re-enlist to get a huge bonus. She won't be able to use her GI Bill, and it would be hard for her to get a decent job. Her rise to fame and grace became shame and disgrace, and even lost some of her friends along the way. I came home one evening, went straight to her closet, and signed her divorce papers where I had kept them. I'm still not satisfied because I don't think she went through half the emotional pain I went through, but this would suffice for now. Whoever said two wrongs don't make a right has never met an emotionally wrecked man backed against a wall. Stick around until the end to see how everything unfolded, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more intense stories.